All right, so this lecture primarily focuses on how to tell a story in detail using composition. And just a couple of quotes from various artists and various academics. Mixture, combination, organizing different visual elements into a whole is a definition for Lieborg, who wrote Visual Grammar, as defining composition. The next one is from Dundas, also a writer on composition itself. The process of composition is the most crucial step in visual problem solving. The results of the compositional decision set the purpose and meaning of the visual statement and carry strong implications for what the viewer receives. It is this vital stage in the creative process that the visual communicator has the strongest control of the work and the greatest opportunity to express the total mood the work is intended to convey. Oftentimes, mood is a huge element in storytelling that we can rely on, especially if we're becoming masterful at the way we compose. Just to review, the elements of design are as followed: line, shape, texture, value, pattern, and time. Time has to do with maybe how fast or slowly it may actually physically move, or the narrative itself in actually creating a sequential time. This is a little weird slide, but the principles of design, according to Art Fundamentals, there are several authors. All right. So when we move to the principles of design, which we've actually already talked about quite a few of them, we want to think about how we can actually apply them to composition, right? So harmony and unity, variety, balance and weight. We talk about visual weight, proportion and scale, emphasis and dominance, economy, movement, and space. And we've talked about half of those so far, but we'll get through all of them throughout the duration of the semester. If you want, take a photo of this and just do a screenshot so that you have this on file. I'll wait a couple seconds for you to do that if you want. Now, these two things together ultimately can yield, and for the most part, reliably, an excellent composition that will hold the viewer's gaze for an indeterminate amount of time. Now, when we think about composition, it actually exists everywhere, even where you don't imagine it will. So what we've got here as a definition, composition here, is an arrangement of elements within a given format. What's the format here? Somebody tell me. The picture that you're looking at, what is the format? You see this every day.
Portraits? Yeah, portraits.
Okay. They're assembled in what kind of format, though?
They're like facing the camera and then like shoulder up to the head.
Sure. You guys are jumping the gun. It's a grid, right?
A straight format?
Yeah, it's a straight format. It's a grid. It's a checkerboard format. We see it every day. Most of you, when you're photographing your work, you move to the grid format as a means to photograph your work, right? It's something that is intrinsically in us. However, what does the grid format generally tell us as a composition? What does it tell us as a metaphor? What does it tell us as a story? What does it tell us individually about these people? Is one more important than the other, or no? Is there a star in this ballet?
No.
What tells you that in this picture?
I think like maybe what like someone else like saying earlier, how like, you know, they're all sort of like they're all like shot the same way.
Yeah, good.
They're similar sizes. Everyone's sort of the same size.
Okay. One other thing? Now, what would happen if one of these people were looking in a profile and not looking at the viewer? What would that tell us?
They would stand out. Oh.
Say it again?
I just said like they would like stand out from the rest.
Right. They would exist as the focal point. And what would it tell us about them?
They're more important.
Or they don't fit in.
Oh.
Right? So focal point can be used as a means to give us a hierarchy. That when I keep saying hierarchy, I mean you're establishing dominance, right? You're telling us that this person is more important than the others. Now we've got all these people here, and we've got disparate ages, we've got disparate ethnicities, right? And we've got different genders. One of these things is not like the other, doesn't happen here. And so ultimately, this is the great equation. This is the great equator. No one stands above. There is not a prima donna in this opera, and it's not an opera. I know it's a ballet, but there isn't a head of this actual company. So when we're thinking about composition, you have to start using your sketchbooks. And everybody uses their sketchbook differently. Let me say this very carefully and clearly for you. Your sketchbook is for you. Your sketchbook is not meant to be seen by others. Your sketchbook is a visual record of your problem solving. Some instructors will have their students constantly turn in their sketchbook to prove that you're thinking visually through a problem. I generally don't do that because I believe that if you're not using a sketchbook, you're going to figure out that ultimately you're always going to land on the first decision that you make as a solution to your problem, and it's generally going to be the weakest. So what a sketchbook should do is it should provide you an evolution of thought that lands on the strongest possible design and composition. So here we've got a couple of examples. I don't think it's a student, I think it's a professional artist sketchbook of the way she ultimately solves her visual problems. Okay, very clean, very ordered. They're all sort of conventionally the same. But as we think about what we do in our sketchbooks, we think about a couple of things. You want to think about a thumbnail. You've all heard of a thumbnail before? Not your hand thumbnail, but a thumbnail is a sketch. You've all heard of this? For those of you who've heard of it, tell me what a thumbnail is.
It's usually like, oh, my bad. Oh, I was gonna say it's usually like a quick sketch, like 5 to 4 minutes to get your ideas just on the paper,
right?
And not really necessarily focusing on technique, just getting like we use the composition in order.
Good. And it's characterized by being what? Small or big? How big are they?
Usually just tiny.
Yeah, like a thumbnail, right? Like your hand thumbnail. That's why they're called thumbnails. Good. So this is another one of those slides you should probably take a picture of. And this will exist as a kind of guide for composition, a checklist. Now, if you're thinking about the rule of thirds, if you're thinking about balancing parts, leading lines, repetition, point of view, your background, man, I can't tell you how many students neglect their background. Your background can make or break an image. The notion of depth and how you're creating depth. Framing, if we're thinking about that round little stage that was in that surgical image that we saw in the last lecture. How the image is cropped. And then, how the rule of odds, right? The fact that when you're putting multiple elements that are the same in an image, you want to think about using odd numbers. So either 1, 3, 5, 7, or 9. You don't want to put 2 pencils in that composition. You'll want to put 3. For some reason or another, the rule of odds tends to be more visually appealing to most people because it correlates to the rule of thirds, ultimately. It's just simply what we find more harmonious. So as people develop their compositions, they're playing with all of those things: cropping, emphasis, visual thrust, the rule of contrast, right? And as people think about that, they actually really do push their compositions. Each one is incredibly different, even though it's all the same still life. Which is why in a drawing class, we typically start you out with still lifes, because there are infinite possibilities for how you can light it, how you can position it, how you can backdrop it, how you can create space, etc., etc. So just because there are 1, 2, 3 things in this composition, there are really a plethora of solutions to the problem itself. Now, some people use just simply light and dark as a means to compose. And this actually falls back onto the notion of notan. And notan, I didn't have it in here spelled, but notan is N-O-T-A-N. And it's actually an Eastern way of solving a visual picture or composing a visual picture using just black and white. Okay, so shadow essentially, and flat shadow at that, which is why we're actually working in silhouette for this project, because ultimately you have to deal with silhouette if you're dealing with composition. Some people will play with placement as a means to solve it. And mind you, everyone's style is going to be very different from one to the next. And then, of course, cropping. I want you to notice the butt edges in this particular image, how this pair of scissors just kisses the edge of the composition, and how tense that is. That's not the strongest composition. This person is doing the exact same thing here, kissing an edge. But what's smart about this image over here is this notion of framing and repetition. We have this shape that sort of looks like a mouth. We have this shape that sort of looks like the top of a mouth. We have this shape that looks like the same curvature. So we have this repeating element of curved forms again and again, which is quite smart as a composition. I would grade this one image down because of the butt edge and how close it is to the picture plane. So this person continues to actually to commit that crime where they're just kissing the edge over and over again, almost in every single image. So as a page, I would actually say that this person understands the elements of composition, but they're breaking the one rule, the cardinal rule that I will repeat over and over again. Do not kiss your edges. You wouldn't want these two things to kiss, which they are, and you wouldn't want the edge of the thing to kiss your picture plane. Cut it off. Let it go beyond the picture. All right. Some of them can be more developed, and note that perspective is a huge way to create a visual dynamism, a way to kind of create depth in narrative structure. And what I mean by narrative structure, you're telling me where to go. You're physically putting me in that space, right? You're telling me that I am of a certain date and time. This might be medieval. You're telling me that I'm high up and I'm looking down at what's going on, that I'm important as a viewer. You're telling me I'm not important as a viewer when I'm looking up at a thing. So there are all kinds of ways to compose using the same subject. And that is probably the most difficult thing for an artist to do, using the same subject, but figuring out different compositions. So here we have a Monet painting, and this is just a black and white reproduction. And then we have the same time and place, the same day. Painting right next to him is Renoir, right? And we have two they're basically the same composition with some elements. Walk me through what's different in this image by Renoir versus the Monet. What's different in this image? Obvious things first.
The man is standing on, I think that's a bridge.
Good. So the placement of the man is different than the placement of the two men in the other one. What else?
The second image is has a darker contrast than the first one.
Good. It has more going on in terms of dark and light shapes. Good. What else?
The first picture has movement.
You think? Yours has more movement? I would probably agree with that. Maybe because this is such a hard line, it almost looks like it continues back into space. Good. This one's a little more static. But what does this one have that this one doesn't? I'm looking for one other thing.
I see the boat that it's landing at shore on the right side, and the man is on the dock.
Sure, they're a little bit further away. They might be leaving. But one other design thing that I'm looking for.
The second picture is more busy than the first one?
And
or the right picture?
Good. What makes it more busy?
There's more boats in the background.
And what exactly is the artist doing to make there appear more boats in the background? I'm fishing here.
Move the frame.
Okay, another way to say that is to move the horizon line up. So the horizon line on this one is right in the center of the picture plane, creating a more static composition. And the horizon line is up here. I think, now ask yourself, which composition do you think is stronger, the first one or the second one? And as you ask yourself that, think about our rules. I always told you don't break the center of a picture plane in half. And he's done that here. What he's done over here is he's broken the picture plane in thirds. Here's the horizon line. Here's the second horizon line. So we've got 1, 2, 3. All right? We also see further depth in this painting here, thus allowing him to populate it with more going on. So it's a much more active composition. he's not actually just putting more boats in it. What he's doing is he's raising the picture plane so it looks like he's hovering above rather than at the shore. And so he can see more going on. So it's much more active for me. So as you ask yourself these questions about what is a stronger one, how does this make me feel, is another way to actually phrase that. Because I think that the picture in the first set, the Monet picture, is much more peaceful, right? Versus the second one, which is a much more dynamic composition. And there isn't that much that's different in order to tell us that. So, as we think about composition, your instincts are essential to this. You already know what a good composition is. When something looks a little off, you kind of already understand that in your gut. And so we're already embedded in this culture that sees composition and can actually understand it. But what we're doing is we're breaking down the rules to composition as a means to apply it. So, as a picture, we want to have all of these things: unity and harmony, variety, balance and weight. One of these things is not like the other. See the splash, right? Unlike everything else, so we have focal point. We use economy. Notice how simple things are that aren't important. We have movement, and movement can be created with just perspective if you want, or just shapes. We have space, created also with perspective, and then we have proportion and scale. This is an enormous shape, but the building is far bigger, right? So we play with scale as a means to put us in a scene. So, we're not going to do a total deep dive into this, but there is actually an addition to the principles of design, which we'll call postmodern. Postmodern is a whole complex idea, and it's actually the movement that we're living in today. And we'll actually, at the very end, play with one of these postmodern principles, which is appropriation or stealing. So this just sort of included as a sort of, heads up. There are other academics and there are other artists out there saying that there are different principles than the one we've always taught. All right. The video I need you to watch is on YouTube. It's called Composition and Storytelling, and this is the still that is used for it. So